Before we go jumping into talking about, of course, the Conservative Party conference, which opens opens its doors very soon. In fact, this weekend. I think we need to go over briefly what is essentially the Labour Party conference. And essentially, what the Labour Party conference was, racked by internal division. Keir Starmer decided to pick a fight with his own party after even Tony Blair, of all people, on the record, had said, look, even Labour needs the left. So, there is a very, very clear position here. And I think Labour is going in the wrong direction. We had the attempted rules changes. Unfortunately, PR did not pass, which was very, very disappointing. It's very, very disappointing that the fact that we had so much momentum from the local Labour Party affiliates voting this through after being told you'll never get more than 80, getting over roughly about 211 different local local Labour parties, to get to vote to put forward PR to be on Labour's next manifesto. That is an incredible achievement. Unfortunately, the trade unions have really done a disservice, I think, to the party there. You then have the Keir Starmer's speech, which, well, while being nice, will be forgotten. It was hardly the barnstorming speech that it should have been. While Starmer did talk about policy, he did not say how he would do that policy different from the current administration. And quite frankly, if you can remember any of the details about Starmer's conference speech, well, congratulations. You've probably got a better memory than probably anyone else in British politics, because I'll tell you now, there aren't people today, even though it was just last Wednesday, a lot of people have forgotten even the very contents of that speech, which will be all but wiped out from anyone's political memory the second Boris Johnson gives his. But all is not well in the Conservative Party. I keep on telling people this. The Conservative Party, currently at the moment, is in a bit of a bind. It has two equally opposed factions of how they think the party should go forward. You have Global Britain, and on the other hand, you have Levelling Up. Two ideas of the Conservative Party that are directly at odds with each other. You have the northern pool of Boris Johnson has managed to secure with the old traditional supporters. And again, they are completely at odds. You've got all those new northern MPs versus all these southern MPs from like the traditional Tory heartlands. Again, they are completely opposed to each other. And this Tory conference could be interesting because we could see Tory party activists rebel against Boris, which could be very, very interesting. Because if there's one thing that in the past has destroyed the Tory party, it has been its own internal divisions. So before we do jump into this article, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And also down below, there are links to my Patreon page, as well as one off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much for all the support that you give me. So this is the title. It comes from The Guardian. Boris Johnson doesn't fear Labour. His biggest problem will be his own party activists. When Tory activists gather in Manchester over the coming week, the country may be in crisis with fuel shortages and warnings that Christmas is under threat. But for the first time in 5 years, the Conservative Party is not in a crisis of its own. Because of COVID, the last time the Tory grassroots assembled for their annual meeting was back in 2019, before Boris Johnson's landslide election victory. Back then, the UK's exit from the EU was in doubt, and an election loomed that could boot the Tories out of power. Two conferences before that, they were defined by the disorder of the Theresa May years. In 2017, the party witnessed her disastrous cough-ridden conference speech, And the following year, the event was dominated by opposition to a Brexit deal and speculation of over who might replace her. Now things are much more sedate. We're leading in the polls and the Prime Minister is in a good place, says one government advisor, predicting a rather static, perhaps dull affair. It's a midterm conference when politics is starting to get back to normal, said one MP, who believes lots of members will just log in rather than travel the 200 miles to get there. It's probably a safer option with a fuel shortage anyway. Even ministers find it bizarre that the party is comfortably polling ahead of Labour at a time when the country is at a standstill. This week's Labour conference didn't exactly send chills through Downing Street. If anything, it's been viewed as a welcome distraction from the fuel crisis. As well as the sharing banners online criticising Angela Rayner's comments suggesting that Tories were scum, MPs took their own Tory WhatsApp groups to critique Keir Starmer's speech, mocking the Labour leader over its 90-minute length and the fact that he didn't even mention any of the Labour Metro mayors, such as Andy Burnham by name. He is too insecure too. He knows it. They are circling, says one Tory. With no opposition to worry about for the time being, the plan is to use the 4-day conference to fire up Boris Johnson's domestic agenda, with a focus on the NHS, crimes and jobs. COVID has dominated Johnson's first year after the general election, and his team want to move the conversation onto the recovery and the issues he campaigned on during the election. Delivery is the word of the day. With the next election just 2 or even 3 years away, there is that now, in essence, it's time to show what Johnson can add some muscle to the current vacuous slogans such as levelling up. And we've talked about this before, about how lots of Tory MPs are annoyed of when it comes to talking about levelling up, there's no meat to the bones. There's nothing. And they're getting pretty antsy because they want Johnson to now deliver on this. And remember, just a couple of weeks, you may or may not remember, just a couple of months ago, Johnson was meant to give this big speech all about levelling up, to which he said nothing. So this has got a lot of people in the Conservative Party very, very agitated, very, very riled up. So, Johnson's first in-person conference since winning the majority of over 80 seats will be a jolly affair. The Prime Minister is in an optimistic place, boosted by the cabinet reshuffle and his recent trip to the US. There's talk of making his leadership speech different in format to the others, more resembling a rally. But too much has happened both in COVID and in number 10 since that result for the party to be fully in a celebratory mood than it would have imagined back in 2019. Plus, there is still plenty of space for things to go wrong. Number 10 has taken a very hands-off approach for conference planning this year, and the reshuffle means that many ministers will be speaking on their brief for the first time in numerous fringe meetings. There are even deep nerves in government over the cost of living crisis, exacerbated by the combination of rising taxes, the universal credit cut, the labour shortage, supply distribution, and the risk of inflation. Even if the fuel crisis eases as hoped, it will only be seen as one of the problems. With energy prices and driver shortages being long-term problems with no easy solution, any trigger-happy conference performances could jar with a very out-of public. But given the poll lead has so far been unendangered, Johnson's far bigger problem could be his own activists. While there is happiness that the party is comfortably in power, you only need to speak to a handful of supporters to pick up on the concern over its current direction. Under Johnson, the Conservatives are moving to the left on the economy, and the tax rise to pay for the NHS backlog and social care was accepted by Tory MPs with an absence of enthusiasm. They backed it because the Prime Minister was set on it, and he had the power enough to push it through. I haven't spoken to a single MP who believes that social care will actually get the money it is meant to. Everyone assumes the NHS will take it all up. Ministers complain that they didn't go into politics to do tax rises. Some come very close to doing so publicly, with Jacob Rees-Mogg being one of the 3 ministers to speak against the idea in cabinet, decrying on the eve of the conference that Britain is already taxed as high as the country can afford, which is completely false. We have actually, when you compare us to the rest of Europe, we are very much a country that expects very high level of services, but we have a government in place that does not want to pay for them. We are taxed incredibly low compared to the rest of Europe. So we are hardly, shall we say, high as the country can afford. But a 4-day meetup in which the low tank, low thinkers and the true blue activists turn up in their droves has the potential to be rather bruising for a Tory Prime Minister who believes to have little in the way of ideology. Being an unconservative and raising tax is becoming a much bigger issue, says a senior Tory. Add to this any boosterism, mentions of the net zero carbon emissions, and of course expect questions from the grassroots over the cost. The Prime Minister's first conference since winning such the majority finds him in a stronger position than a year ago, when COVID dominated the agenda. But for him to try and galvanise his support, he would be wise, when he hits the stage, to try and answer a question his MP and activists are asking all too frequently these days. What is his Conservative Party for? So, bizarrely, it's bizarre. We find Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer at the exact opposite ends of each other. We have one party who has all but abandoned their leader and is even looking past him to think, who can we get him to replace Keir Starmer? Is it going to be Angela Rayner? Is it going to be Andy Burnham? My own MP very recently stepped down from being the mayor of the Sheffield City region. That will now go up for an election. It is again very likely that Labour will win. And we don't know who is going to stand for that as of yet. But Dan Jarvis is one of the rumours that always comes up of who can replace or who can we put forward for leader. So it will be very interesting to see what he does, whether he will or not. But again, it's not like he hasn't signalled past before. Like I say, last time, of course, when people were pushing him to go for leadership, his wife had just died. So he said, it's not a position that I want to take at this moment in time. Keyword, at this moment in time. Does he now think that him stepping back from being an MP, because compared to the Sheffield City region, to the rest of the regions, like Andy Burnham, who has far more power than Dan Jarvis did as Sheffield City mayor. Well, the Sheffield City region mayor. The same things were happening in the Sheffield City region as they were in the Greater Manchester region. But every time Dan Jarvis tried to get his word out, he didn't get it out as effectively as Andy Burnham did. And we have to have to wonder whether that's the direction that a lot of people are going in, whether that's what people are going to say. It's Burnham, shall we say, who shall we say is the leader in waiting, just waiting for, shall we say, the axe to fall on Starmer. Whereas Boris is having more and more questions about his party asked. What is it? What are your beliefs? You tell us you're going to do all this stuff, but what is it you are exactly going to do? It's bizarrely almost the exact same thing with Starmer. You're the leader. You tell us you want to do all these things, as did in the speech very recently. So how are you going to do it? They are in a somewhat similar position, but at least for Boris, his party, for the time being, supports him. But as we've discussed before, Boris seems to run his Conservative majority like it is a majority of 20 rather than 80. Boris Johnson and the Conservatives could essentially run anything they wanted through, and are, given the changes to the law, the protesting police. We've seen it all in the past couple of weeks being very, very authoritarian. Some things which, again, if they weren't happening here in the UK and were happening in elsewhere, we'd call it a rise in potential fascism, or should we say authoritarianism at this point. But we'll have to see where obviously this goes, and we'll have to say that the conference, and most especially Boris's speech, could be very, very interesting. But as always, thank you very much for watching. Please remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And also down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.